As the world's third largest oil producer, Russia pumps millions of barrels of crude out of the ground every single day. Yet the nation that built a geopolitical empire on energy is struggling to keep its own engines running. Down at the street level, the reality is stark. Everyday Russian citizens are spending up to 12 hours waiting in sprawling queues at local stations, desperate to fill their tanks with whatever low-grade petrol they can find. By mid-2026, this domestic fuel crisis had paralyzed large sections of the country. Rationing measures and empty pumps are now a daily reality, directly impacting over 50 million citizens across two-thirds of Russian regions. Parallel to this infrastructure breakdown, the Russian military is experiencing a massive vanishing of manpower, with thousands of soldiers quietly abandoning the ranks. The Kremlin designed a war of attrition to exhaust its neighbor. Instead, that prolonged friction has hollowed out the Russian war machine from the inside, dragging the devastating consequences of the conflict straight into domestic territory. The infrastructure collapse traces back to a calculated military shift in mid-2025. Facing heavily fortified front lines, Ukraine launched an intense, long-range drone campaign aimed directly at the arteries of the Russian economy. Rather than strictly fighting in the trenches, they targeted deep territory oil refineries, major pipelines, and regional fuel depots well beyond the border. This animated chart illustrates the resulting damage. In a single month, 16 different refineries were hit. You can see how daily gasoline production drops off sharply, falling 25% short of the peak summer demand of 110,000 metric tons. The breaking point for the capital came in June 2026. A precision strike took Moscow's critical Kropotny refinery completely offline. Industry sources expect the structural damage to keep the facility out of commission until 2027. The Kremlin was forced to address the obvious. Russian leadership publicly acknowledged the nationwide queues and missing fuel grades, though they attempted to wave the situation away as a temporary inconvenience. State broadcasting cannot patch structural damage to a refinery. The physical production numbers confirm that the state is currently unable to supply its own internal civilian logistics, let alone sustain the massive energy requirements of a prolonged war. The shortages triggered extreme responses. The Russian government had to ask neighboring Kazakhstan for 50,000 tons of emergency gasoline. Concurrently, Kazakh authorities busted a massive illegal smuggling operation, moving over $75 million worth of fuel across the border. But the most revealing symptom of this crisis is found thousands of miles away. To avoid total gridlock, Russia turned to India for emergency gasoline. This map outlines the bizarre trade loop keeping Russian pumps active. Russian crude oil is exported to Indian refiners, like Nayara Energy, which is partially owned by Russia's own Rosneft. It is refined there, then sold right back to Russia through independent traders. By July 2026, two massive tankers delivered approximately 60,000 metric tons of gasoline back to Russian shores just to meet immediate domestic needs. This circular trade route exposes a severe vulnerability. The state has lost its domestic processing independence. Without relying on foreign refining hubs, the Russian civilian economy would stall entirely. While you can buy refined gasoline from a foreign partner to keep the machines running, you cannot import citizens to replenish the trenches. According to official convictions and UN human rights estimates, between 28,000 and 50,000 Russian soldiers have abandoned their posts and gone AWOL since the invasion started. This line graph highlights the collapse of the military replacement rate. In January 2026, the lines cross. Confirmed combat losses surpassed 30,000, while new recruits stalled at 22,000. In real time, the army was shrinking faster than it could rebuild. Behind those numbers are cases like Oleg. A 24-year-old from Western Russia with a clinical schizophrenia diagnosis, Oleg was lured into signing a military contract with the promise of a lucrative, non-combat security job. Once enlisted, he was immediately slated for a frontline assault squad. Realizing he was being fed into highly lethal combat conditions, he fled, bouncing from Moscow to Belgorod, desperately looking for a way out of the country. He eventually managed to slip through Belarus and escape to Armenia. His extraction was coordinated by Get Lost, an underground network that has actively helped thousands of men avoid conscription or desert their units entirely. For those who can't access an underground railway, the exit strategies are violent. One soldier named Yevgeny convinced a friend to shoot him in the leg, knowing that being legally classified as wounded was his only guaranteed ticket away from the front lines. When active duty troops resort to self-mutilation and rely on illicit border smuggling networks to survive their own commanders, the foundational discipline of a military force is already gone. For years, residents of major Russian cities treated the conflict as a distant, abstract event fought by someone else. The combination of fuel rationing at the local pump and the mass disappearance of enlisted men has shattered that insulation. The economic reality is now inescapable. With inflation hitting 6% and basic infrastructure sputtering, daily survival anxieties have rapidly eroded geopolitical pride. The pressure is reaching the highest levels of the Russian financial sector. The CEO of Sberbank, the nation's largest state-linked bank, bluntly told shareholders that the primary concern for everyone in the country is simply ending the military hostilities as quickly as possible. The state is currently trying to buy time by offering massive $15,000 signing bonuses to poorer recruits. But intelligence sources predict this is a stopgap, pointing toward a forced, highly volatile mobilization wave immediately following the September elections. An offensive campaign requires a stable, productive base to sustain it. By pushing its military and energy sectors past their physical limits, the Kremlin has triggered an uncontrollable internal rot, proving that a war machine cannot survive when it is forced to cannibalize its own homeland.